Recording.
So what we're going to do, Alex, is we're just going to run through a series of interview questions, and you're going to respond however you feel like it. And at the end of the interview, if there's time, we are going to have a conversation. How's that? So let's start. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your family?
I was born in London in 1930. My father and mother were in business and sent me to private schools at the beginning of the war because they wanted to get me out of London, so that I had a privileged education, if you like. Around 1941 I was brought back from the private school and put into a local grammar school, which fortunately for me was very science-based, and that meant that when I graduated from high school, as they say here, I was already very interested in biology, and with the help of the biology master, I got a scholarship to Imperial College in London, where 3 years later I got a BSc special, and that again was fortunate because my professor had a friend, a colleague, who was running a virus research unit in Cambridge. He got me a place there, and so I was able to study there and get my PhD in virology in 1954.
Wow.
I've spent the next 60 years working in the research, development, and production of virus vaccines for humans and animals, and the last 20 years of my career as a consultant to the Biotechnology Institute, the biotechnology industry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
That's all right.
So, in one way, I've been very, very fortunate in my life because I was able to move from school to college, from college to university, from university into my first job in 1954 with the British Pharmaceutical Company to make Salk's polio vaccine. And when I was 16, 17, maybe 20, 21 years with that company. They were taken over by another British pharmaceutical company, and at the merger it became obvious that there were going to be some redundancies, to use a British word. And fortunately at that time, one of my colleagues had already emigrated to Canada and was working with the Canadian vaccine laboratory in Toronto known as Connaught Laboratories. I was fortunate enough to be offered a position with them. So with the support of my family, we all emigrated to Canada in 1979, and I worked with Connaught Laboratories until my early retirement in 1963. And during that time with Connaught, not only was I responsible for vaccine development and manufacture, but we also got very heavily involved in the creation of new vaccine production facilities, and I worked with the Canadian International Development Agency to carry some of that technology overseas. For example, I built 2 laboratories for the Pakistan government for polio and for measles, and we had other similar contracts where the Connaught's technology was exported. Instead of exporting the vaccine, we exported the technology with the support of this aid agency. So in 1983, was it? I can't remember, sorry. Yeah, I think it was 83. That must have been 93. In 1993, I retired from Connaught Laboratories and set myself up as a consultant. And I spent the next 21 years helping new companies and old ones to comply with the regulations governing the research, development, manufacture, testing of virus vaccines, which became more and more complicated as the science developed, so the necessity to do more testing became important. And I wrote 5 manuals on how to comply with the various regulations for manufacture research, clinical research, laboratory work, and they were very successful too. My last few years as a consultant, I worked with a group of consultants out of Boston in the United States, and that made it much easier for me because they found the work. Okay, and they would phone me up and say, do you want to do this? Would you like to investigate that? And I'd say, yeah, well, maybe, or no, I think I've had enough. So anyway, by the time I reached the age of 84, I had had enough. Then I retired. And what does all this mean with respect to the theatre? I first became regularly involved with the theatre just shortly after I joined my first job, because I was living away from home and staying in lodgings, and the landlady's daughter was a member of a local community theatre called the Proscenium Club, and she took me along there, and it meant straight away I had a community. Because here I was living on the south side of London. My parents were in the north. I'd never been south of the river before. The only people I knew were the few people in this very, very new virus department at this big pharmaceutical company's research center. And this way, I fell in with a gang that were doing 11 shows a year in a small theater that had 47 seats, 7 rows of 7. We did everything in that tiny space, except we couldn't quite manage Shakespeare because the stage was only the same size as the auditorium. And the front row were sitting with their feet on the stage.
Oh, that's fun.
And we had bleachers going back.
Oh.
But I started with them as a stage manager, obviously, when I was sort of working backstage, painting scenery, got interested a little bit in lighting, did some sound effects for them, this sort of thing. And eventually, because all community theatres need male actors, they persuaded me onto the stage. And the first show I was in was called The Summer of the 17th Doll, which is Australian. And according to the local critic, I did this with the most excruciating Australian accent he had ever heard.
Can you do a bit of
But I grew out of that as well. So over the years, the community theatre has been a place where I escaped from the scientific discipline and the worries and the concerns and the problems that we were always facing in this very, very new business. Let me explain just one thing about this new business. It was so new that when we tried to scale up any vaccine development process to commercial scale, we had to invent the equipment as well to do it.
Oh my.
Because there weren't available the sort of things we needed. I remember one of my very first experiments, I actually had to use stainless steel beer barrels because that was the only thing I could find that was big enough to hold 50 litres of whatever it was of my very, very precious virus fluids. But that, by the way. So there was a Proscenium Club, and that was my main start. And the fact that we were doing 11 shows a year means I got a lot of experience in a very short time.
Do you remember a favorite play?
From that time, yes. It was actually a little later on because it was after my wife had joined me, and I'll come to that in a moment. But we did a play called The Rape of the Belt, and it was about the Trojan Wars, and about the time when I think that was it. Anyway, the story was that the women had decided to withdraw their sexual favors until they stopped the war, okay? But the whole thing was overseen by 2 gods, Zeus and Hera, male and female. And I played Zeus with a bright orange curly wig and lovely orange curly beard and lots of body makeup because our costume was just a sheet. But I love that part. It was such fun. So I have to bring my wife into this because she was so important to not just to my personal career, but also to my theatrical career. I joined a North London theatre club a few years later because I moved back home, having been able to buy a car and commuted to work, and I missed my mother's cooking. So I joined this North London theatre club, and Tina, my wife-to-be, was one of the stars there, and I started with them as a lighting designer and operator, and we got together after one of the shows. We were engaged 3 days later, and it was quite a romance. But she was a wrestling professional, as they call them in England. She was a graduate of the Royal Academy, gold medalist, and she had been touring with a professional company and caught hepatitis, infectious hepatitis, dropped out. And when I met her, she was back at the theatre club where she'd started, which was quite close to where she lived. So after a little while, I was allowed on the stage at this club called the Mount View Theatre Club in London, very well known. It was also a theatre school, and she had gone from the Mount View Theatre School to the Royal Academy, gone back to the Royal Academy when she had to stop professional work. Her father lowered the boom on professional soon after she became infected. You know, he said, "This is not the life for you. You're going to become a secretary." He was very Victorian in that effect. Anyway, eventually we were allowed, I was allowed to be...
I want you to tell us what you want to tell us. You tell us what you want to tell us.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask
about
you...
what the theatre... Yeah, well, see, I'm segueing into the theatre.
You're getting there.
That's right.
Are we-
I'm almost there, actually.
Okay,
Yeah, yes.
okay. So you learned from... So what you're telling us is everything you learned about the theater you learned from Tina.
Exactly, yes. She was my mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Working with her was an experience, to say the least. Eventually, I tended to concentrate on theatre direction because I'm an A character, A type, and I like telling other people what to do, and I think I have a bit of a talent that way, maybe more of a talent for that than for acting. And so when she was taking a part, I directed her a couple of times, but whenever she was taking a part, I would help her with the lines, of course, but she'd also wanted me to look at her performance and give her some feedback and so on. And this, of course, was very educational to me too, because it meant I had to be analyzing my own reactions to what was going on the stage. And this is one of the ways that I believe you build your experience as a director.
So...
She and I were members of the National Theatre Club. So when Laurence Olivier set up that marvelous organization at the Old Vic, south of London, we were at every one of their shows until we came to Canada. So we got a tremendous amount of experience, not only from doing our own shows, but also from watching some of the very best actors in Britain and directors with their productions at the Old Vic and then eventually in the new complex on the South Bank.
So I'm going to ask you to skip forward a little bit. So you came to Canada, and you worked and you worked at that site that used to be at Bathurst and Steeles, I think. The drug. Where did you work in Toronto?
Oh, I worked with the Connaught Laboratories.
With Connaught,
yeah,
that was
in
at
Toronto.
Bathurst and Steeles, yeah.
That's right.
And how did you come to Guelph?
Oh, we have to come forward a long time because I was already working as a consultant then. My wife contracted cancer in 2006, so 2005, and she passed away in 2007.
I'm sorry.
At which time I'd I was still trying to work because it was very difficult being on my own. I decided to sell the big family home we had in Uxbridge, and my son, who lives in Mississauga, asked me to see if I couldn't find somewhere to live a little bit closer to Mississauga, because when they were trying to visit their mother in her last days, it was a long drive from Mississauga to Uxbridge. Mm-hmm. So we looked at Caledon, and we looked at Aberfoyle, and eventually we found a development in Rockwood, mm-hmm. and I had the opportunity to buy a new home and have some influence over the interior design, which mm-hmm. helped me. I got a house that I'm very, very happy with. I've been there now 16, 17 years. Mm-hmm. So, because I'm living in Rockwood, I'm halfway between Georgetown and Guelph. Yeah. Right. Acton and Guelph, actually, but on the same road is all the way to Georgetown. Mm-hmm. The reason I came to the Guelph Little Theatre was because of their reputation. And that is to say that while we were still over on the east side of Toronto, we didn't know about the Guelph Little Theatre because it popped up in the newsletters, WODL awards and this sort of thing. And the main reason I came the first time was because Jerry Butts, who then was one of the main directors of the theatre, was doing a Shakespeare show every 2 years. And I've never really acquired a Canadian accent. Mm-hmm. And therefore, for me, the opportunity to be in Shakespeare was ideal, because then I could use my voice and I could use my accent and not feel strange, so to speak.
Do you remember the first play you did?
Yeah, it was Much Ado About Nothing. I played the older brother mm-hmm. of the father of Hero, and I think they liked it. I know I had a great time. So we did a couple. Then there was a pause, and then we did another one. Trying to remember I think it was the Merchant of Venice. Okay. And then I can't remember exactly why, but I was also brought to my notice that there was another theatre club in Georgetown, and I was invited over there, or I think I went over there to see what they were doing, and so I spent a little time shuttling between the two. In Georgetown, I got involved in the administration, and I had to pull them out of a bit of a hole when they lost their treasurer, and because I'd been self-employed for quite a while, I agreed to do that. So I spent 5 years as their treasurer on the board there, and that sort of took up more time than the acting, actually. Yes. But it's good experience, and of course it's another group of people. We exchange people anyway. I mean, somebody we lost not so very long ago, Pam Lindsay-Ovetsky Curtis, was at Georgetown when I was there, and then she's back, or was back in Guelph until her passing a few months ago. So I came back to Guelph not so very long ago, because from Georgetown I ended up in Elora. Why? Because the Elora Community Theatre does Shakespeare in the Park every year. And again, Shakespeare is my prime love, you see. Mm-hmm. And so I actually did 8 shows with them, 8 consecutive summers, taking different parts. Always, we were in Much Ado About Nothing twice. It was one of my first shows with them, and they did it again last year. So I think I've been 3 times in Much Ado, twice in Romeo and Juliet, and only once in any of the others that I've appeared in. Always in the older parts, of course.
Mature. Not
Mature,
old.
in the mature parts.
Yes.
The dukes, the kings, the fathers, which are nice because Shakespeare did write parts for older people, which was a great help for me, because I can't really pass as for 40 or even 20 or 40 these days. But in each case, and this is what I'm coming to now, regardless of which company it was, regardless of the fact that there were always some problems with clashes of personalities and so on, because we all have personalities, but in each case there was the community inside of the theatre and the broader community that they brought into the theatre to hear and see their performances and to be involved in their performances to a greater or lesser extent, partially as a result of what they were doing on the stage and partially as a result of what they were thinking sitting here in the auditorium. But there's always that two-way, and there's nothing like it. There is no experience that I can think of that matches being up on that stage and having the feedback that you get from the audience when the play is running and they are reacting to you and the story and what you're saying and what you're doing. And this is marvelous, and I miss it now, because I had to stop acting in the park. I can't walk that well anymore, having turned 95, and it's a big gap in my life now, and which I'm hoping to fill a little bit by doing more direction. Okay, and so for that you then are placing yourself really in the position of being the audience person, because you're going to create the picture, you're going to create the experience for somebody sitting in this seat.
What do you think the audience comes to the theatre for?
There are so many different reasons. Okay, first of all, some of them come because they get tired of going to the movies or watching TV, because again, it's the live aspect. Okay, the fact you're actually, a lot of people come because their friends are up on the stage or their daughter's in the show. You can't get away from that. Friends and family, we depend on them to such a great extent to come and fill this 250-seat theatre, but I think they some of them at least must feel what I feel, that there is a unique experience if the show is any good at all. Even if it's bad, I suppose if it's bad, there's also an experience, but you don't want to experience that. But the good ones, you have to leave with something. Are you uplifted a bit? Are you highly amused? Are you shattered? Are you intrigued? Were you frightened? All these emotions can be heightened by what's happening on those boards there.
If you were to say to somebody who had their arms crossed like this and said, theater, live theater, I don't need it. I can watch it on YouTube. What would you say to them to say, dude, you're missing something?
I would say, okay, watch it on YouTube. I mean, if you don't want to be bothered, then you're coming to the theatre, you would be coming to the theatre with the wrong attitude anyway. And there has to be some prepared to be receptive to what's happening on that stage. And if the person has that attitude that you've just given to me, then I would say don't bother. If what you're happy with is working with the small screen, or even the big screen, even the movies, okay? Most people now, of course, are on Netflix. Netflix, yeah, which is small screen. Yeah. I mean, I watch a lot of theatrical productions on my TV.
Yes.
Because instead of having a Netflix subscription, I have one to Stratford at Home, which is the Stratford Theatre in Canada, and I have another one to the National Theatre at Home, okay? And I see their shows filmed on my TV, and that is the next best thing. My daughter lives in England, in the Midlands, in Derbyshire actually, in the Derbyshire Dales, near where they used to shoot All Creatures Great and Small. They were a bit further north, but anyway, so she's quite away from London, okay? There is two theatres in Sheffield, so they go occasionally, but the National Theatre films are shown in Sheffield movie theatres. So she goes to the movies to see a play.
Yeah.
And it's not the same as seeing a movie.
No, it's not.
Because you don't get the same jump cuts or the background music. A movie is a movie and a play is a play. And even a film of a play is not the same as a movie.
So it's the live interaction.
Absolutely.
So
because when you see, sorry to interrupt, if you watch that movie, that film of the play, you can hear the audience.
Yes.
You can have the audience reaction and you can be there, you can be one of them. You're laughing when they laugh because you're laughing at the same thing. Okay? And that sometimes happens in movies too, but I don't want to talk about movies because they're really another art as
it's a
far
whole
as I'm
different thing.
concerned.
If I were to ask you, if I were to give you a microphone, because I bet you don't need one, but if I were going to give
I don't need one.
I kind of thought. But if I were going to give you one anyway, so I could record it, and I were going to send you to somewhere with a bunch of young people in a high school or maybe even a university or a community college, and I were to say to you, convince these people that not that the theater is good for them because they're kids, but that they're going to like it. What do you think you might say to them?
I think I'd ask them the question first of all. I'd say, well, why don't you tell me what entertains you? And then I would explain that, well, if you like that, can you imagine seeing it done by real people? Can you imagine, for example, on the one hand, watching the duel at the end of Hamlet on a movie when you know it's only movie stars and you know it's all being done by stuntmen anyway, and there's always, cutting. They've been able to go back and do it again until they got it right. And now think of yourselves, you're looking at this platform with light shining on it, and there are two people on there fencing with swords. And they cannot stop and start and do it again. They're going to have to do it, no matter how many mistakes, no matter if somebody gets cut, they still have to do it, and they have to go on, and that's live. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing something that nobody's ever seen before, because last night's production was not the same. Every performance is different. Every audience is different. So it is a unique experience. And I'm thinking of the fact that Stratford now, they're running some of their shows from May all the way through to October. And maybe one particular company group is doing one of their shows maybe twice a week or something. But even so, that adds up to 20, 30 performances. And each one of those performances will be different. And that's why they go on and do it again, because they never know how it's going to be. They're so well rehearsed, of course, that they can cope with anything that might happen on stage or even in the audience, but they still don't know. There's always that little frisson of danger about the whole thing. What if?
What if?
But really, if it's done properly and if they're receptive, it's living the story with them. Imagining yourself as one of them, and feeling the echoes in your own experience. Well, I felt like that when that happened to me.
Talk to me a little bit more about that.
About
the feeling within you of
Yes.
what you see on the stage. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Well, I can't I can't speak for your average audience member because I've been sitting in the theatre as somebody steeped in the art for 50 years? I think my theatrical career is actually 70 years now, when I think about it. Okay, so these days I have to confess that sitting here and watching a GLT show that I haven't actually seen in rehearsal, for example, coming to it completely fresh as an audience member, the first thing I want to see is that it's been well set, that I can believe in the story as it's laid out in the beginning of the show. There is somewhere, that's the setting, okay? It's on a mountaintop, it's in a dining room, okay? There is a play called A Dining Room, you know, yeah. Okay. And the people are dressed according to how they should be, and the people look right for their parts, and I can hear them. One of the problems I have with actors these days is that they are not taught how to speak.
What do you mean by that?
And as a deaf person, I find this very frustrating. I keep going back to my hearing aid specialist and saying, can you crank it up a bit for me? And they say, it's not the loudness, it's distinctiveness. It's the fact that people mutter. They don't open their mouths. They talk like this. So
do you think that the Guelph Little Theatre could play a role in helping young people?
Absolutely.
And how do you think we should do that?
Well, we've been talking about this. In fact, my co-director and I would do the last show I did here, which was the murder mystery at the end of last season. Not the end of last, but one. I did this as a co-direction with Jennifer Tiffin, who's, as we say, she's learning to be a director. And we were talking about next season, and we're talking about the time between the shows, because we have the first act, the one act coming off at the end of June, and then there's a big gap until we start in September, October. We were talking about maybe it's time to be doing some voice workshops, which I have done for other companies. When Elora, for example, decided to do the works of Jane Austen, I had to go and teach the young ladies how to speak like English young ladies. It goes even back further back. We had Georgetown has a youth theatre, so I have done voice workshops for them. And what we're thinking about now is to do maybe 3 sessions where we can talk about breathing, we can talk about projection, we can talk about using the voice for the character, okay? It's critical. If the audience cannot hear you clearly, does not understand what you're trying to say, you've lost your communication. Yeah. It's not a mime. I mean, Shakespeare, not only Shakespeare, most good playwrights have written very good dialogue. And the action is only part of it. They don't come on and just walk about and wave their arms and so on. They actually say something. They're talking to each other. They are characters reacting to one another.
So if you were going to write a play, if Guelph Little Theatre came to you and some other people and said, write us a play, what would you write about?
I have no idea. I'd have to think about that very seriously. It's the one question that I wasn't really prepared for. But can I talk around it a little bit? I think the first thing that I would do is to try and find something in my own experience, a story that needs telling. And then I would say to myself, well, is it possible to make this into a theatrical story? Is it something that you will put on the stage because it has movement, it has projection, the process because it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know. And whether, can we cast it? Am I writing it for people that don't exist, you know? And I think, what do I want to do? Do I want to entertain? Do I want to terrify? Do I want to tell a story just? And so what's the best way to tell that story? Should we tell it as a drama, or we tell it as a comedy? I've always been attracted, as a director, to plays with lots of action and quite large casts. I like doing that. I've even done musicals, but that's something else. I would write a musical. I can't write music, but it wouldn't be. I don't think it will be a play with just a few people. I think it would be a play about a community. I think it would be, you know, what would suddenly occur to me when I said musical, that marvelous show, Come From Away. Though you take this group of people and put them into this situation. They are now living something that they have never lived before. They've been dumped in this tiny place somewhere in the wilds of cold Canada. What are we doing here? We can't fly home, you know. We've come from away. And the people, what's the name of the town where it happens?
Where were they?
Well, let's think of a group of people who find themselves in an interesting situation, and how do they manage it? Because that is the sort of thing I feel the audiences can react to.
Let me ask you this. You've shared with me a little bit of your experience as the kind of scientist who looks for the things that are going to help us in this world. And of course, we've had a heart-rending experience in the last few years. Is it time to start dramatizing some of those experiences? I
think what you're probably asking is, should we be using it as for catharsis? And I think in that case, if you think that you could actually, would it be not too cruel to expose an audience to that, because it's still too fresh in the mind? And what sort of story can you derive from it? A story of recovery, a story of struggle. Too many facts. If you take the COVID story itself, there are too many actors, because it involved everybody. I'm not talking about any particular country, but it involved everybody from the very top, so to speak, of the management of the country, right down to the individual person in their own home, not able to go out because they've been locked down. I don't know if people would want to see it, actually, because I wonder whether people are actually prepared to relive that right now.
You think it's too soon?
It might still be a little bit too sensitive, you know. I wouldn't personally want to go and see a show like that. I wouldn't be interested, because I've lived it, you know.
Yeah. Interesting.
If you think about, I'm thinking about a very, very famous movie from many, many years ago now, called The Seventh Seal, which was about the Black Death.
I remember it.
I took my wife, that was our first date.
Oh my God.
God, what a big mistake that
was. And she married you anyway.
Yes, she married me anyway. She came out of the theatre flooding in tears because it was so gripping.
It's very emotional.
You know, I mean, that was the Black Death. It was 400 years ago. So it's almost like saying, would we do a play about that terrible plane crash in India, which happened yesterday?
Yeah. Would we do a play about a plane crash that we know might happen?
There have been planes. There have been. Yes, I think that is the sort of tragic situation. They made movies about it because it's easier to do it with a movie. The physical side would be difficult, but you'd have to do a lot of projection and so on in order, I'm thinking already of the practicalities.
You are.
You see, that's one of the problems with writing a play. It's got to be practical. You've got to be able to, what's the point of writing if you can't get it on the stage? I think the staging of a plane crash would be very, very difficult. I saw a National Theatre production which was all about the Battle of Britain, and they had 2 enormous projection screens at the back of the stage, and so the dogfights were up on there, you know, and it was actually filmed from actual, and that's the only way that was done. What was down here was the hangars and the runway and so on, but up there was the fighting.
I saw an opera that was done like that not long ago. Yeah.
I really feel at the moment that it'd probably be, if I was going to write something, I would write something that made people feel happy and laugh.
Okay.
I think we have enough harrowing things in our life. I'm not going to talk about the United States and the state they're in now, but I mean, that I find that very, very distressing.
Well, it's awful.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you, we've talked about theater, we've talked about your connection with theater, we've talked a little bit about GLT, and I'd like you to kind of wrap that up a little bit and tell me, if you had all the money and all the time and all the people, you could go like that, what would you ask for Guelph to make GLT a better theater company than what we are now?
I don't think it's a question of, I wouldn't like to use the word better, because that's critical.
Okay.
It's not for me to judge how good GLT is, because I'm within it. But if you were to say to me, what would be the best thing that I could do for Guelph over the next few years, and I would say, I would create a youth company. I would make it easier for people from high school to extend their experience, to work with all the equipment that we have and the ability that we have to create theatre. It would help them with their self-confidence. I've worked with youth theatres in England as well. We actually had a drama school in one of the theatre clubs I was working with. But we've always found, and this was the same with the youth group in Georgetown, that young people who are uncertain, young people who are unhappy with their ways of life, young people who feel a little bit lost, can find a home in the theatre, can find a means whereby they can express themselves through other people, through playwrights, by working with others, and they can develop that very, very important feature that everybody should have, that skill. It's called empathy, the thought of others. Because to be an actor, you have to be responsive to the others on the stage. You have to be responsive to the story that the playwright is writing. You have to be responsive to the reactions of the audience. And this is something that is learned through working in the theatre. We should be more empathetic towards each other. And community theatre, in my view, is one of the very best ways to develop that.
I think that's a wonderful way to end our talk. Thank you so